HMS survived 2 world wars. She survived being hit 15 times at Jutland. She survived bombs and torpedoes and guided missiles and a collision that should have sunk her. She earned more battle honors than any ship in the history of the Royal Navy. And then in 1947, the British government sold her for scrap. So why did nobody stop it? The HMS Warspite was launched at Devonport in November 1913. She was a Queen Elizabeth-class battleship, one of the first in the world to run entirely on oil instead of coal. That sounds like a small detail, but it was not. Oil gave her a speed no coal-fired battleship could match. She could hit 24 knots, carrying 8 guns that fired shells the size of a man. Each shell weighed nearly a ton. Her main belt armor was 13 inches thick. She displaced 33,000 tons when fully loaded, roughly as heavy as 30,000 family cars stacked together in steel and iron on the open sea. Winston Churchill was present at her first gunnery trials in 1915. The records show he was suitably impressed. He had taken a gamble on her 15-inch guns when nobody was certain they would work. They worked. She was built to outrun anything she could not outgun, and to outgun anything she could not outrun. That was the idea. For 30 years, the Navy tested that idea in every ocean on Earth. And the ship held up. At Jutland in 1916, she was in the middle of the largest naval battle of the First World War. The 5th Battle Squadron came under fire from the entire German High Seas Fleet as it turned to join the main British line. The Warspite scored hits on the German battlecruiser Von der Tann and on the Markgraf before a German shell damaged her steering gear. At 25 knots, the helm jammed and she spun in 2 full circles, directly toward the German line. She was under the guns of the entire German fleet for several minutes. She was hit 15 times by heavy shells. 14 men were killed and 16 were wounded. A shell passed through the captain's quarters. Another tore through her engine room. And yet she did not sink. She made it back to Rosyth. On the way home, 2 German submarines fired torpedoes at her. All of them missed. The steering problem from Jutland was never completely fixed. It would follow her for the rest of her life like a shadow. The Second World War found her in the Mediterranean. She sank 8 German destroyers at Narvik in April 1940, while her own reconnaissance aircraft sank a German submarine from the air, the first time in the war that had been done. She hit the Italian battleship Giulio Cesare from 26,000 yards off Calabria in July 1940. That is 15 miles. It remains the longest-range gunnery hit on a moving target ever recorded in history. The Italian ship had to be withdrawn from the war. This is the bit that got me when I was researching this. The Warspite fired her guns in anger for the last time, bombarding German positions on Walcheren Island in November 1944. By that point, she had fought in 15 separate major engagements across 2 world wars. No other ship in Royal Navy history has matched that number. But the damage had piled up. At Salerno in September 1943, the Luftwaffe hit her with 3 Fritz X-radio guided bombs. One of them punched through 6 decks and blew a 20-foot hole in her hull. Her boiler rooms flooded. She took on 5,000 tons of water and lost all power. She sank 5 feet lower in the water. 9 men were killed. She had to be towed to Malta, then to Gibraltar, then back to Rosyth. The damage was never entirely repaired. In 1944, she set off a magnetic mine on the way back from Normandy. It blew open more of her hull. She was patched again and sent back to bombard the French coast. One of her rear gun turrets had been locked in place since Sicily, unable to rotate. The steering jammed again off Sicily, turning her in tight circles before the crew brought her under control. She kept fighting with what she had left. She was decommissioned in February 1945 before the war in Europe had even ended. She was 30 years old, and the Navy had no more use for her. She had sailed approximately 160,000 miles since 1939 alone. There were calls to preserve her. Men who had served on her wrote letters. Naval historians made the case. She was the most decorated warship in British history, a ship that had fought at Jutland and Narvik and Matapan and D-Day. The argument was not complicated. Put her in a harbor and let people walk her decks. The Admiralty said no. Britain in 1946 was almost bankrupt after 6 years of total war. The Treasury needed metal, and the Warspite was full of it. Her guns were removed at Portsmouth. Her wheel was given to the King of Norway, who passed it to the city of Narvik in memory of what she had done there in 1940. On the 19th of April, 1947, she left Portsmouth under tow. 2 tugs were pulling her north to a scrapyard at Fastlane on the River Clyde. Somewhere off Land's End in Cornwall, she hit a storm. The tow cables snapped. The Warspite dropped her anchor in Mounts Bay, but it did not hold. The storm drove her onto Mount Mopus Ledge near Cudden Point. She refloated on the next high tide, only to run hard aground again at Prussia Cove a few yards away. Her skeleton crew of 7 men had to be rescued by the Penley lifeboat in 25-foot waves. The coxswain Edwin Madron brought the lifeboat alongside in breaking seas, and held position with his engines while the men leaped across one by one. All 7 were saved. The Warspite was not. Engineers tried to refloat her. They brought in compressors and pumps. In 1950, a crowd gathered on the Cornish cliffs to watch the final attempt. 24 compressors pumped air into her hull. 2 tugs pulled on their lines. One of the tugs got a cable wrapped around her propeller. The other ran onto the rocks. The Warspite did not move, so they broke her up where she lay. Workers cut her apart on the beach at Marazion in full view of the public over the next 5 years. The job was not finished until 1956. The contractors called it the largest salvage operation ever carried out in British waters. Some of the teak from her decks ended up as furniture in the houses of the men who dismantled her. Tables and sideboards and chairs. People in Cornwall still have them. A memorial stone stands near the seawall at Marazion. It reads, "Known to all who served aboard her as the Grand Old Lady. 15 battle honors, 2 world wars, Jutland and Narvik and Calabria and Matapan and Salerno and Normandy. The most decorated warship in the history of the Royal Navy. Sold for scrap in 1947 and broken up on a Cornish beach because Britain needed the metal and could not afford the sentiment. She fought off everything the enemy sent at her for 30 years. She could not fight the accountants.